everyone, and live from Vienna, Austria, it's Saturday morning. How is everybody this weekend? We have reached on the Orthodox Church's calendar the Akathist Saturday, that is the Akathist hymn, which means the hymn during which we do not sit. Akathist means not to sit or not seated. We praise the Mother of God today. I am very blessed to live right next to a bridge that is called the Maria Bridge, because in the middle of the bridge there's this beautiful statue of Mary, the Most Holy Theotokos. And people sometimes, I rarely see this, but someone stop and quietly pray there. There's always a lit candle somehow there, just one, but fresh flowers always at this statue. Have I told you about this before? Anyway, so I can see also this statue from my window, and where, she's in the center of this bridge, like a bridge over troubled water, my friends. And yeah, I sometimes like also to stop there and commemorate some names of people who either have asked for prayers or haven't, and I commemorate them anyway. So I do that as part of my routine. Today, because we're praising the Mother of God, I was thinking, if I had a prayer rope that was light blue, because that's her liturgical color, I could sort of, accessorize with a light blue prayer rope. But as it happens, even though I do find colored prayer ropes a little bit tacky. Don't tell anyone. I'm just telling you in the privacy of our Saturday morning live show. But look, what I realized that I now have as a light blue accessory is this thing. The mask has arrived in Vienna, Austria. Right now, the rule is with these masks, you'll realize that for technical reasons, I can't wear this mask with the habit, can I? Did anyone think of the Orthodox nun population when they thought of this? No, I don't think they did. Anyway, my friends, they have made them since Wednesday mandatory in supermarkets, but not in public spaces. They're not sure that it's actually going to help. They're saying it couldn't hurt. Basically, that's what you hear them say. I heard Governor Cuomo respond to a question on it. My new celebrity crush, by the way. God bless him. So he said also, probably couldn't hurt, but they're still discussing whether it's necessary. So I think it is, back when we didn't even think that we would perhaps be wearing these masks, you would see sometimes the Muslim women who have the full hijab and are covering their face, half of their face. You can't see the person, you become like invisible. I was thinking a lot about it this week because I myself am now experiencing the mask. Also, technical issue. If I put the mask on and I wear glasses, it fogs up your glasses immediately. So I don't really know how it's supposed to work. I am all for complying whatever they say to do. I am doing it, right? But with the mask, it's it's very daunting to me, unless you're really ugly. You don't appreciate not being seen. I find that to be dehumanizing. I'm not preaching here against the masks because they're going to figure it out and tell us, what we're supposed to do. I am not a non-complier, if that's a word. Anyway, I think it's going to be an issue. I think definitely it'll be a liturgical issue if masks will be eventually required in, say, a church setting. We do have a very iconographic kind of spirituality in that we celebrate. You don't have icons that hide the faces of any saints, right? We celebrate being able to see their faces. And so I think that liturgically speaking, if a priest's face were to be half covered, right? You can't even notice, for example, I'm just going to jump all over the place on about this issue. You can't notice when someone's smiling, or it's hard to notice if they're saying something to you, and they're saying it with, like emojis for that purpose are helpful in understanding tone, and establishing that something's a joke. For example, when you're saying something sarcastically, the inability to express yourself with this part of your face, which is important. Yes, I know you're going to say, but the eyes are the mirror to the soul or whatever. But the mouth is very important too, right? So we're going to be chatting about this with our very special guest today, Professor Paul Meyendorff. Let me tell you about him, and we will transition into the interview, the moment you have all been waiting for. So listen, Professor Paul Meyendorff, who is Professor Emeritus of Liturgical Theology from St. Vladimir Seminary in New York. He's now emeritus, and he lives over on the other coast near Seattle, Washington, in SeaTac. It's a suburb of Seattle, Washington. And he was kind enough to agree to chat with me about his quarantine over there in Seattle, and about certain liturgical issues, connected to the coronavirus pandemic, and also just spiritual issues of people helping out, and the live streaming business as well. All of these things we'll be talking about, but let me just tell you a little bit about his extraordinary life and experience. He's very experienced in issues and service of the church. He is the son of the very famous theologian, Byzantinist, historian of the 20th century, Father John Meyendorff. So Paul was born in Paris to the family of Father John Meyendorff in Paris, France. And his family, he, one brother and two sisters, and his mom, they moved in 1959 to the USA when Father Alexander Schmemann, whose picture we have up today because this is a liturgical scholar guest, and Father Taft, I'll get to that, but he also wrote his doctoral dissertation under the direction of Father Robert Taft, as did I. So we're academic kin, one could say, and also both PKs, or priests' kids. So anyway, I'm really delighted to have him, on our show. So listen, he and his family lived when his father accepted the invitation to come teach at St. Vladimir Seminary. Like I said, Father Schmemann invited him. These two names you might know they're like the founding fathers of the OCA. It's like their brainchild is the Orthodox Church in America. Anyway, Paul, Professor Meyendorff, he grew up closely, knowing these great minds, thinkers, and in the case of Father Meyendorff, also real great scholars. Because Father Alexander Schmemann, his genius, I think, although yes, I know he was a scholar, but not so much, he was really into the big questions. And the questions that he was able to formulate are certain issues that people continue to chew over. Like, he knew how to identify the questions. He was this very charismatic and, lively mind. Anyway, but let's get back to the life, and background of Paul Meyendorff. So he, like I said, lived in that atmosphere, in that period of, I would say, very interesting and productive intellectual life of those years, that led up to the granting from the Moscow Patriarchate of autocephaly to the OCA, which I think is a good thing. Some people have become very insecure about it, and I think it's a great gift to the Orthodox Church to have something like the OCA, and I wish that it didn't have its identity crisis or get over it and be itself. I don't know how much trouble I'll get into for saying that, but let's move on. So Paul Meyendorff attended Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, majoring in French literature. Then he got his MDiv at St. Vladimir's Seminary. And then a couple of years later, he entered the doctoral program of the University of Notre Dame, and he received his doctorate after writing it under the direction of Father Taft. As I said, this is a book that was very useful to me. Paul Meyendorff's book, Russia, Ritual and Reform. That was his doctoral dissertation. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on a related topic of mid 17th century realities, both in the Greek and Russian practices and Ukrainian practices. Anyway, I will also mention that in 2013, Paul Meyendorff received an honorary doctorate from the Institut Saint-Serge in Paris. He is someone, like I said at the beginning, who has really done and continues to do a lot of service, not just scholarly work, but really he serves a lot. He serves on the Faith and Order Commission of the WCC, so it's an important also research interest of his, ecumenical theology. He serves on various commissions of the Orthodox Church in America, in the Department of External Affairs of the OCA. He was for many years, 18 years in all, the editor of St. Vladimir's Theological Quarterly. I know that he was very always hands-on. I published there in the years that he was editor, many times actually, and I know that he's very good to work with. So I should mention his other research interests, and his contributions have mainly been in the areas, of course, of liturgical various topics. He published a book on the service of the anointing of the sick, something I also appreciated. I don't have a copy of that book in my personal library. He's written extensively on the practice of penance and confession. One of the conferences at which I heard him speak, I remember him talking about this issues surrounding the practice of penance and confession. He has contributed in the area of studying the phenomenon of liturgical reform, both in past and present, and, you know, in ecumenical theology, like issues of primacy, sort of hot topics, you know, both within and outside the Orthodox Church, ecclesiology, sacramental theology, and so forth. So I'm going to stop talking now and let's get on with the interview. Please welcome, with a warm round of applause, my friends, Professor Paul Meyendorff. Hello, Paul. Thank you for coming on.
Good morning, Sister Vassa. Good to see you. I haven't seen you since I was in Vienna a couple of years ago.
I know, I haven't crossed paths with you for a while. So tell me, how are you doing throughout this whole, you know, changed world of the coronavirus era out there in Seattle?
These are interesting times. 4 weeks ago, my daughter, who is an emergency physician in downtown Seattle, told my wife and me, you have to self-isolate. So it's been 4 weeks that we have been basically cooped up in the house. We go out for walks every day. Once a week, I'll make a quick shopping trip for groceries. But otherwise, we've been learning to enjoy each other in a way that we haven't been able to for many years. As far as the church goes, already for 2 weeks, there have been no church services by order of the bishop. The state of Washington has forbidden gatherings of more than 10 people. So the churches are obeying the law. although the priest has started having daily vespers, which he live streams from his house. And so people are able to live stream the services or to watch them later on. So that is a way that we have been able to keep in liturgical contact
Right.
for the last few weeks.
So it's just Vespers. Do you
It's just
I'm sorry, but do you mean like also when there's a pre-sanctified, that it would be the whole thing with Vespers?
no, there was no pre-sanctified,
Oh,
and there was no liturgy the last 2 weeks. But this coming Sunday, there will be a liturgy, but it will be restricted to the priest, the deacon, one altar server, and one singer. And the doors will be locked, and no one else will be allowed to attend. And then presumably arrangements will be made for families one at a time to come receive communion if they're able.
I see. So they would be receiving communion, but so you've been cooped up, right? And the priest hasn't visited you with the holy gifts.
He has not visited us, no, although he said that if it goes on much longer, then obviously he was able to do that. But both my wife and I were able to go to confession to our father's confessors over the telephone.
Right.
So modern technology works.
Right. So I don't know if this is too personal a question. You're only using the telephone, or is it like a video call?
Just the telephone.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't even know what if there is some official policy. Is there about?
Actually, I was just online just before I spoke to you, and our Synod of Bishops just met this week and has issued directives about how to serve services, and specifically saying that confession by telephone is permitted during the period of crisis.
Oh, how wonderful! How wonderful! Yes, that sounds great to me, because it seems for people to have additional stress, they start. It's funny because I think many people don't worry about not going to confession. I'm not, normal times, but the minute you say, all right, you can't have it, or, if you were to say you are no longer able to go to confession, or communion, I think that makes people very nervous. Then they immediately feel like they need to go to confession and to communion like now. I'm not saying this is true about everybody, but I feel that the travel ban, I might not have been planning on going anywhere, but for me to know that I can't go anywhere,
Yeah.
were I to want to go somewhere, is very confining, and I think maybe that brings us to even the silver lining to this strange, abstinence that we're suddenly called to this Lent, that maybe this will revive our, thirst for, not only, or yes, I mean, importantly for the sacraments and for liturgy, but, for face-to-face contact with people, that we maybe kept people at bay with our texting culture.
Well, yes, I mean, absence makes the heart grow fonder. So certainly one of the results is that we miss going to communion. We're so used to going to communion each time that the liturgy is celebrated that its absence feels very strange, first of all, but second, awakens in us the fact that how central it is to our lives, and not being able to have it leaves a gap. It's interesting, the Armenian Orthodox Church has no Eucharist at all during Lent.
Yes,
And
I know that.
and so for the 6 weeks or 7 weeks of Lent, the doors to the sanctuary are closed and no one goes in there, and services are conducted in front of the iconostasis, or the screen that they have.
Yes.
So, I mean, but on the other hand, I think the positive thing here is that I think we're becoming aware that the idea of Christ being among us is not limited to just receiving the Eucharist. It's in prayer, it's in our human contact, even if it's remotely by telephone or video. People have reached out to us from the parish whom we have hardly know, and all of a sudden now they kind of make the effort, and we make the effort to keep in touch with one another. We've received many offers for help from parishioners. So there are other ways to express kind of our unity in Christ than just attending liturgy, which we are precluded from doing at this point. So in a sense, there's a very positive lesson to be learned here, I think.
Right. So what I'm hearing you say is that we're sort of, yes, you said a very strong thing, that we're having like communion in Christ on other levels, right? On other levels. I mean, communion as a very broad topic, right, is of course not limited to, the Eucharist. That's very interesting. So you think this is bringing us closer?
I think it's not only bringing us closer, but it's bringing humanity closer together. Seattle is a very interesting place. There's something called the Seattle Freeze, which we learned about when we moved here this past fall. Seattle people are rather cold. They don't reach out to others. They limit themselves to their circles, to their families and to their close friends, and they don't reach out to others. Now you'll be walking down the street and everybody will say hello. How are you doing?
Really?
In a neighborhood group, it's kind of like Facebook, but in the neighborhood group, I mean, every day I see constant offers for help. You know, people not asking for help, but offering help.
Oh, right.
So it's, in a sense, I mean, these situations are opportunities for people to realize, you know, that we human beings, not just Christians, but we human beings are all one family, and this brings people closer together. But of course, there are those who take advantage of it, all the scams proliferating on the internet and so on. So it brings out the best and the worst in people.
Right, right. So I guess that's what's, both the good and the bad of a crisis. Thank you so much for sharing those observations. I was talking last week with my previous guest, Father Kirill Gavarun, about, a sort of the sorts of changes one observes in society, in the way we are with one another because of this pandemic. And, I find myself sometimes also tempted, to take out on other people my concern for the taking care, because not everybody is equally careful in public. And, I can turn into the angry lady who says, keep your distance in the supermarket line, or don't, a jogger, if we're allowed to go, for the walk or for a jog or to walk the dog. It's different because I don't know if you live, how close you live to the center, but I do live right in the center of Vienna. So potentially, in the parks here, the parks aren't closed, the playgrounds are closed, but the parks aren't. And people are generally good at social distancing, but once in a while they, forget. And so I have to watch that I'm not unfriendly, like the distancing could be also unfriendly when it doesn't mean to be, or I could be, I only did it once, but I did say to someone, because there was a mother and daughter that simply didn't realize that the reason there were gaps in the line is because people were distancing, not because they weren't in line. And so I said, do you see that there's, I posed the question that really snotty way. I was like, do you see that there is a space here for a reason? So, and that is unnecessary. I think people are stressed out enough for that not to happen. So what you're saying is that maybe I think it's also a very good American quality. You live in the good old US of A, and back in the days of 9/11, At least that was the experience in New York. People just tend to really pull together, and they cut out the nonsense, and they try to help. Americans have a gene like that, I think. That's my very big generalization about Americans.
Yeah, no, the only problem I have witnessed is especially young people, college age, who think they're invincible and immortal, who kind of, go on their spring break trips to the Florida beaches. There was one case of 70 students from the University of Texas who chartered a plane and went down to Mexico, and 46 of them now have the virus. And of course, they're hurting not only themselves, but others. But in general, I think people are taking responsibility for one another in a very positive way. So it's the exception rather than the rule, where you have the kind of abuses, that we do witness. They have had to close the playgrounds, obviously, and the parking lots for the big parks because people were congregating there. And so, but in general, at least in the state of Washington where I am, people are really do follow willingly, kind of follow the instructions that they get from the civil authorities.
Right. Let's get back to this topic of the live translations of services. I was thinking just this week, because we had the Great Canon, right? Or a lot of people had it privately, but in the Russian, it's called Andreeva Stoyania, like the Andrew's standing, because it's the canon of St. Andrew of Crete. For those of our viewers who don't know about it, it's a really, even though our services usually are quite long during Lent, but this one's extra long. And it's really considered this ascetical feat to sort of survive it. And so that's why on the Thursday after usually that canon, even though it's chanted at matins, it's celebrated in the evening. Anyway, wine and oil are allowed on the next day. There's an extra liturgy of the pre-sanctified on the Thursday of the fifth week because of this, to give the people who are exhausted from the canon, the consolation of Holy Communion and so forth. So why am I explaining that? I'm thinking if you're listening or watching it live, right, there's like a priest, maybe one deacon, whoever's doing that for the live translation, as we had it also here in Vienna. Do you have to stand? My question. Do you participate by maybe just having that play as background music? Is it allowed to be peeling potatoes and doing something else? Is it allowed for you to be on the treadmill? You know what I'm saying? It raises issues of how does one participate in a liturgical service that one is streaming. So, and I don't want to be difficult about it, and I'm not trying to degrade it, but I think that whole phenomenon, just like going to confession by the phone, on the phone, what is the bodily position? Does it matter? Is it important for us to be visible, if possible, via video, if that's possible? I don't know the answers to these questions, but I think that they will be raised, as we learn to use that. I think it's very positive that if something like this happens, Governor Cuomo over in New York has been talking about this. He made a very good point. He says, this will teach us to deal perhaps with some other crisis in the future where we have to switch, since we do have the technology to do things from home. Like, why don't we have a better educational system also for children that could work without them actually going to school? He thought this is something we should have thought of earlier. But with the sacraments, to what extent they could be, I don't know how to say this correctly, but how could they be made more accessible and exportable from the church walls? How does one, but in liturgical stuff, I'm thinking this, how do we participate? Maybe you could share, I keep rambling on, you could share a few thoughts about I'm not talking about, people who have trouble standing for long periods of time in the first place. And I wouldn't be coming up to people in church and telling them to stand when they want to sit. My question is, there is a movement in liturgy going on, and a certain also physical participation, right? When you're present. So what is the extent, is my question, of your physical participation? How is it expressed when you're following it live via, internet? What are your thoughts?
You're right. It feels very strange. And you tend to watch it the way you watch a television screen. I mean, if you're watching it that way, I mean, you're kind of sitting down, most likely, in the most comfortable position to be able to watch and to listen. And it's very easy for it to become simply background noise in the way that your television screen is when you're having a meal or just doing something, and it's just there as background noise. So it's clearly not the same, and never will be the same.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a stopgap measure that we hope will pass very soon.
Yeah.
I am not a big fan, actually, especially of having the Eucharistic liturgy broadcast, precisely because that, of all the liturgical services, is the one that requires the most, intense and careful participation. And especially if you're not there to receive communion, then in a sense you feel, why even do it? Why not just give communion from the reserved sacrament? Because we're all, in the sense now, like the sick and the shut-ins. And communion has to be brought to us. We cannot participate in the normal, regular life of the church. So I'm more comfortable, I must say, with live streaming Vesper services, which in a way is a help, a guide for our regular prayer discipline.
Right.
Above and beyond what you simply do when you pray in your own room, when you get up or when you go to bed at night. But for the sacraments in particular, I'm almost more comfortable fasting from the sacraments until we're able to gather.
Right.
But on the other hand, now Holy Week is coming very soon. Pascha is coming soon. So I think not to receive communion at least once during this, on Pascha or on Holy Week, I think would be very sad. We would really miss something. So I would strongly favor, in fact, I'll tell you what our diocese is doing. The bishop has allowed the liturgy to be served on Lazarus Saturday, Palm Sunday, and Pascha. And the liturgy on Pascha is supposed to be in the morning, not at night, so that then family units can come one at a time to the church to receive communion, assuming that it's legal, for one thing, and that the priest is taking all necessary precautions, that the infection not be spread. So, but again, this is a once in a lifetime, or once in a century kind of event. So I think it's hard to generalize on the basis of that, and we have to deal with it one day at a time and pray that soon it will be over and we can return back to our normal, ordinary life, which we'll appreciate all the more once we get through this.
Yes. Thank you so much for that, Paul. I'm thinking of several thoughts that you just, expressed about, how about the other services besides the Eucharistic liturgy or even the pre-sanctified liturgy? It's no secret to anyone that the Liturgy of the Hours, basically any other service besides the Divine Liturgy, that they are really under the radar of the vast majority of our faithful for a long time already. It's true also about the Roman Catholics. There's basically, it's almost non-existent, Vespers,
Yeah.
or the other services. Maybe, that's for the religious orders. So I think for us to resist picking up the tool of the hours, or at least the principle of hourly prayer, in even a very simplified way
Mhm.
that the ancient Christians did practice, even if it's like 3 times a day, the Our Father, like I think it's in the Didahi that way,
Yeah.
um, this pristine practice and the practice of desert fathers. There's a moment in the life of Mary of Egypt where Zosima or Zosimus is wandering in the desert. I think it's like right before he, sees her in the distance. And he was about to sing like the 6th hour or something like that, because they would wander about the desert and just follow, the way the sun, because these hours are of the sundial and not of our mechanical clock, obviously, right? So approximately every 3 hours, he would pray an hour, which at that time probably was exactly the same thing, but it just would
Yeah.
occur throughout the day. Now that principle, I think, is a wonderful tool for a person, a lay person, going through his or her daily routine, interrupting it briefly, not with this whole, not going to be with the bells and smells, but it's going to be a simple, like little rule or pravila, of, say, even if it is the Our Father, maybe it's, with something else, like maybe one of those will have the creed or some basic, reaffirmation, reconnection, with the whole mystery and with the presence of God in our lives. Or even using the Byzantine hours with this. I've suggested this to my, the listeners to my podcast, because I actually do this myself, because I know just the main troparion of each hour that is sung during Lent, right? Like for the 1st hour, it's like, in the morning, hear my voice, my King and my God. I don't do it in English, that's why I forgive the translation. But the main thought of each hour, right, is there in the troparion. So there could be that way of practicing it, that, in your morning, whatever you're doing, you might be making your coffee, you're doing this, that, you're making your bed, and you could be singing if you're a singer, or if you're not, and you don't live with anyone, you could sing anyway. But if you do, please don't sing too much. So, in integrating into very much the layperson's life, an element that you're really doing something, like liturgical doing. You're not sitting and being an observer, because that's what worries me about this. Oh no, but we only, because our whole, liturgical life is only the Eucharist. That's the only thing we pay attention to. It's like we're resisting picking up those tools that the desert fathers, not just the sick and the shut-ins, like you just said, right? You're like, we're being like the sick people. No, you're like the desert fathers. Those anchorites who would have some poor soul that would wander out there and bring them either communion, or would bring them their bread periodically, right? But we're like Mary of Egypt, of course, didn't have the communion for 47 years, and she did just fine. Doesn't mean communion isn't important, but it means that there's this very provocative challenge of her life being so focused on in Lent,
Mhm.
like she's really very noticeable. And is it a coincidence somehow that this is happening? A lot of people are saying this, but it's happening during Lent. Quarantine comes from quaranta, just like tessera costi comes
Right.
from 40, right? So
Right.
we're being taught something maybe about, a deeper, more, uh, maybe actually traditional Lent than we've turned it into. And like the Armenians, that, all right, I have to let you
Yeah.
talk, but
You,
okay.
you raised some interesting points. Uh, I taught liturgy at St. Vladimir Seminary for 29 years. And I often said to my students that the most dramatic liturgical reform, Orthodox talking about liturgical reform, the most dramatic liturgical reform in the modern era has been the total abandonment of the office. We've reduced our liturgical life to just Sunday liturgy, pretty much. And you look at our churches, Vespers or vigils, even on Saturday night, are, very sparsely attended compared to the Sunday liturgy. So we've reduced our liturgical life to Sunday liturgy. Now, the other point is that, we often make a distinction between liturgy, common prayer, and private, what we call private or individual prayer. I was always struck by a passage in the Apophthegmata Patrum, Sayings of the Desert Fathers, or one of the 4th or 5th century texts that speaks about the monks in the desert, in the Egyptian desert, and how at each hour of the day, each monk in his or her cell, over miles, square miles and square miles, would be saying the hours simultaneously, but individually. And so the desert rang out like a symphony.
Oh,
Well,
wow, yeah.
is that private prayer or is that liturgical prayer? I think the point is precisely that even the prayer of an individual in his or her room is part of the prayer of the church.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
all that we pray because we are baptized members of the church, and we in our prayer we pray not only for ourselves, we pray for others, but our prayer joins the prayers of all the saints and all the saints across all time. I mean, the
Right.
liturgy is not just about the here and now, it's about the church from the time of the apostles until the time of the eschaton.
Right.
So in a sense, I mean, I think what this present situation, which calls for this kind of self-isolation, kind of reminds us that even if we are isolated, nevertheless, we're part of something much bigger than ourselves, and everything that we do affects everyone else. Not only in the church, actually, but even the whole world, because we always pray for the whole world. On behalf of all and for all, as we say, not just in the Eucharist, but in every prayer that we offer.
Right, that's beautiful, Paul. Thank you so much. Yes, you're saying imagine, because of the different time zones, and we're very much aware that the whole world now is dealing with this one, ironically, I suppose, unifying us as one common enemy, this virus, the invisible enemy. What if people were like praying the hours, in their own, let them do it in their own way, but there would be a constant, this incessant prayer of the church
Yeah.
around the world of at that specific time. That doesn't happen at the same time as far
Right.
as the different time zones go, but it would be incessant, because when some of us would be sleeping, the others would take over and continue that hourly, let's say in the ancient way, like every 3 hours of intensified prayer. And it could be brief, I think that because it's so very complicated to actually follow all the services going on, say in something as complicated as liturgically, as Byzantine Lent, those of us who have conducted the choir during those weekday services, it's like, that is like the Olympics of being a Ustavshik, of being I don't know how to say it in English, responsible for the, the typicon during Lent. Anyway, but if this were doable in a simplified fashion, but in a very real way, in a traditional way, because hourly prayer is traditional, and it's also nurturing. It's helpful not to just get lost in the disorientation and the fear and the things that people can slip into in this strange, lockdown. I think that would just be very helpful. And like you said, it would really help also the world. It makes a difference. So yeah, that's wonderful. But what concerns me about live translations, and again, I know I'm raining on a lot of people's parade because it's like this, the one thing we have, and it connects us to Father. I get that part. I get the part when it's your priest doing it, right? And it's at the time when he's doing it, it connects you with what he's doing. So insofar as it connects us, just like this I really reconnected with you now, Paul, because I haven't seen you for years, right? And this is quite an effective way to reconnect. But when it comes to liturgy, right, I think that the danger of that is that we already have, in I think, in many ways become simply spectators of liturgy. A lot of people, in those parishes where there's no congregational singing, where people just stand, there's beautiful, singing of the choir and these complicated, things going on. I'm not saying that people don't pray, but there is an extent to which it can just be a spectator thing, you know and if you're watching a live translation, you're almost definitely being a spectator.
No, but I think what you say is very important. I mean, you can be a spectator even when you go to church, as we normally do, and not participate fully. We sit in pews and we watch the clergy and the choir put on a show for us, and then we tell the priest afterwards or the choir afterwards it was a beautiful concert. So that there's always that risk, for everyone, that not to engage in liturgical worship. And obviously here, I mean, when you're live streaming services, that automatically turns us into some kind of spectators.
Yes.
But nevertheless, even there, I mean, I think it's still, it's important to maintain a discipline of prayer. I mean, you're talking about hourly prayer, but even prayer morning and evening is part of the normal discipline of every Christian, which kind of keys into the ongoing liturgical prayer of the church. And it's not separate, it's really interconnected with that. I mean, and so we kind of include ourselves or enroll ourselves in or we jump into this river, which is the church through time, through history, leading up to the kingdom. And obviously some people engage more than others. I mean, that's a perpetual temptation for everyone.
Right. The thing is that those evening and morning prayers, I find that the fact that the way that developed is that those private prayers of like evening and morning prayers they've always been paraliturgical. They're not part of the church's daily office, as you know. They're just not. I mean, they are something that developed as a paraliturgical phenomenon. But the fact that those hourly prayers that are there and the practice of morning and evening prayer that's actually connected to the tradition of matins and vespers and the themes of matins and vespers, the fact that that's not even considered to be, something that a private lay person could integrate somehow into their daily prayer, why wouldn't it be? Why are those services, right, like something that's done for me by either monastics or the people who sing and chant, in church, and by the priest? Why is that not considered our thing, like the doing, the work, the liturgy, right? The liturgia of the church, of all of us. I think that to somehow engage in the doing of that, of greeting the morning in a very wholesome, theologically well-rounded way, not with just a string of penitential, listing of sins and the most of the stuff that happens there, but with with that celebration of like God is the Lord and at least elements of it. I mean, I'm not this is not very coherent as to what I'm proposing, because I don't think it's realistic for lay people to get up and chant the whole Matin service, right? But in some way, at least a little hours, I think that that is just a doable thing. And I think that rediscovering our tradition, but not over, not this watered down kind of thing. And distortion, really, it's a distortion, as you said in the beginning, of, and you called it a major reform, right? That the daily office has been just fallen by the wayside, right? But to rediscover it now, and if we don't, fight it, I think, by insisting that we still want it done by someone else for us, because we can't live without that. That's what church services are. It's what someone else does for us and that we come to watch. And it's like, we want to keep it that. No, now you do it. Now you do it. Pick up what you can do and do it. But raise up your voice to God, like actually do, or do a little procession if you're cooped up with your whole family, right? With whatever, with the gospel book, with a cross. We're old calendar folks. We're still going to celebrate Annunciation on Tuesday. You've already had it last Wednesday. So, I'm thinking, so what do? We're definitely not going to have a service here. There will be a live translation of a service, right? But what do I do in my little space? Should I wear something light blue? That's what I'm thinking. For the color of the Theotokos, I'll accessorize with light blue chotki and have the icon of the Annunciation and pick some flowers for the icon and sing the Troparion and Kontakion, but I'm listing things that I could actually do that give me some external ritual, because I'm also physical, right? And the liturgical doing, not just reading, not just saying, but the liturgical doing is something that I want to rediscover, not because it's always going to be this way, right? I'm not suggesting that we all just sit in our apartments and dress in light blue. But, to somehow reconnect with the liturgical doing that's not just being a spectator of someone else doing. Have I said that too many times? Paul, share your thoughts with us so that I stop talking.
Well, I think that the most important thing for ordinary lay folk, who are not monastics, who live in the world, who work, is to have a discipline of prayer. It can take many forms. It can be, as you say, kind of a portion of the daily office, the hours or elements of matins and vespers. It can be like the Didache, late first century, early second century text. It calls for reciting the Lord's Prayer 3 times a day. It doesn't say what else was said. But in a sense, it doesn't matter. The important thing is to keep Christ kind of in our mind. You can do this by saying the Jesus Prayer. You can do it by saying the Lord's Prayer 3 times a day. You can do it by saying the hours. I think the advantage, kind of the benefit I think we derive from the live streaming of services is that most people aren't even aware that these services exist. And in a sense here, there is it's an educational opportunity for the church to reach out by digital means to the houses of the parishioners, to remind them in a sense that these things actually exist, and these are part of the tradition of the church, which has been virtually neglected in the last century or so, in the modern era. So, I think good can be taken out of it. Is this the final answer? Of course not. But I think, in my mind, the most important thing is to kind of maintain that discipline of prayer, whether it's just one prayer or more. I think it's important for us. There's an interesting statement, again, in one of these statements of the Desert Fathers about, the injunction in 1 Thessalonians to pray constantly. Well, we have to sleep. We can't pray 24 hours a day. The Jesus prayer is one answer to that, but not everybody is given the gift. So how do we pray constantly? Well, we pray constantly by maintaining a discipline of prayer and by the fact that other Christians are doing the same thing, so that when I'm not praying, when I'm sleeping, somebody else, as we said before, somebody else is praying. In other words, the church is always praying, and so praying constantly does not mean that I personally have to literally be praying 24 hours a day, but that as a member of the church, that prayer is being held. I contribute my part, but when I'm not praying, somebody is praying for me. And when they're not praying, I am praying for them. And so in that way, the church prays constantly. And how that's done has varied tremendously over the centuries. I mean, yes, you have the present typicon of the Byzantine Church, which if you carry out literally would be almost constant. I mean, a full Matin service, according to the typicon, would take about 4 hours. There's an interesting experiment in the Academy of the Caves in Kiev at the beginning of the 20th century, where the seminary students decided to do a vigil service according to the typicon. And they spent months preparing all the material that it would take to do that. And they did it. And it took 7 hours and 50 minutes.
Yeah.
And then, as Skabalanovich, the Russian scholar from Kiev, reports, the experiment was not repeated.
Yeah.
It was simply too much. But obviously, I mean, there are different ways in which that can be done. And in this time of troubles is an opportunity to kind of experiment, in a sense, try out different things that maybe we didn't even think of doing before. Whether it's live streaming services, which I agree with you is not the ideal solution, but certainly engaging people more in the daily prayer of the church at home, since they can't do it in church.
Yes, I know priests are being very helpful and stepping up and being creative as to how to share with people, because I don't know, I think that at this time, just like the people are at home, what would be nice is to see the priest in his home. Maybe they're doing this. I haven't been following it because I just, I have to produce my own stuff online. And so I do my podcast stuff on a daily basis. People really seem hungry for it right now. So, I do my little bit. But I think that when the people are at home, for the priest to also to give a word, of encouragement and his sermon in his home, just the way people are cooped up at home, rather than be in a different place, like as they're barred from being in the church, but there he is in the church. It's fine. I'm not judging by any means judging the priest for that, but I'm thinking that in popular culture, right, these like late night comedians like Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, Conan O'Brien, they're doing these live, not live, but they're doing these episodes now from their homes, and you're seeing their children, and sometimes it's very endearing. I find you see a different side of them. It's actually gaining them even more popularity because they're doing that. It's not as polished, as it would be in the studio. So I'm thinking maybe I like to learn from the popular entertainers, because if you have a missionary has to use the modern day technological advances and approaches and the language of today to reach people's hearts, right? So I think this would be useful. Maybe it's an idea, to have that live like word and sharing of this situation within the home.
Well, actually, our priest from the St. Catherine Orthodox Church in Kirkland, Washington, which is actually the epicenter of the coronavirus, that old age home where all those people died, was in Kirkland, so a mile from that church. He actually, the daily vespers he does is from home, and it's his wife and children who are the choir, and he offers a word at every time that he does it. So it's exactly that.
Right.
But for the Eucharistic liturgy that will be done by live streaming, that has to be done from the church. The bishops have explicitly forbidden, I'm not quite sure why, the priest from celebrating the liturgy from his own house. I don't know why they did that, but that was their decision. Probably they want to prevent abuses from happening. But nevertheless,
What abuses?
I don't know. I mean, I really don't understand why they said that. In an emergent circumstance, the liturgy can be celebrated anywhere. And even with a face mask on, as military chaplains or chaplains in military hospitals have to in certain circumstances.
Well, maybe, if the circumstances get more dire,
Of
they'll
course.
require more dire measures. Who
Yeah.
knows? But listen, let's get to those masks now that you mentioned them. A little bit, I'm not changing the topic. It's a connected topic. The masks have been contested amongst actual authorities who are supposed to know what is needed, to prevent the further spread of the virus. But here in Austria, and we're about 2 weeks or maybe more, 3 weeks ahead of you as far as the progression
Right.
of this situation, even though actually Austrians have done very well. So we seem to be flattening the curve for now, but the government keeps saying, don't get relaxed, don't stop being vigilant, because now people feel, oh, we defeated this thing, but they didn't. They're like, this is a calm before the storm, because we do border with Italy. So that's like saying, the boogeyman is in your closet, but, the door might open. So anyway, the issue of masks. So now they've changed their opinion, and it's like a ripple effect. You're going to see they're going to change their opinion on wearing masks. So these are being handed out here in Austria in the supermarkets. I told you this before we started recording, but my viewers don't know that. And I'm not going to mention my first complaint. Well, now I'm mentioning it, that nobody thought of how this works with this. Why didn't they think of me first? So I don't know how to wear it when I'm wearing my habit. If I'm out for my power walk, I'm not wearing my habit, then I could wear the mask. But here's what I want to talk to you about, Paul. They're saying now, we now do think it's a good idea. They were saying just like the Americans were first saying, no, it's not necessary. It doesn't protect you. It does protect others from being infected by you, blah, blah, blah. And we don't want you buying the masks because the healthcare workers need them. All right. But they've said two different things now. Number one, this is not an N99 mask that the health workers need effectively to be protected, right? This doesn't protect. So this is a flimsy other kind of mask. I don't know what it's called, but they're giving them out for free. Austria has now ordered from somewhere millions and millions of these to be given out for free, and they're mandatory in a supermarket, because in the supermarket, it's just close quarters, right? So you have to put it on in there, but they're thinking about making them, and this pains me to say, I'm going to get to why this pains me, from a sacramental, spiritual, anthropological level, right? They're thinking of making them mandatory everywhere in public spaces. So I'm going to get to what bothers me about this. The practical problem with the masks they have found, and why they're reluctant to introduce them more aggressively, is because people start to think that they can relax social distancing. Oh, I have the mask, I'm protected, and they get closer to each other. But it's not protecting, and relaxing social distancing is very dangerous right now. So it would be counterproductive. But if they can get people to keep social distancing and put on the masks, then they think overall we're better off, and these are not the masks the health workers need anyway. Okay, but what disturbs me is if we would keep the social distancing, maybe it's not up to me, but I'm telling you my concerns, that when I went out, I did try to wear it also on my power walk. I don't know what to do about the fact that if you wear glasses, it starts to fog up your glasses, and you're with this, and you're also blind. So that's just an issue. I think you have to like either wear it a little lower, pull your glasses down, something like this. Anyway, there's a practical concern, but here's the spiritual concern. When you're walking around like this, your reaction, if you're not born like in Saudi Arabia or in, Iraq or somewhere where you often see women covered, if you're not used to that, maybe I can only speak for myself, but it's disturbing to see a woman never seen in public. Like if you can't see her, I think that we all want to be seen. When someone treats you like you're invisible, right? That is literally the definition of being despised, or prezrenly in the Slavonic means literally not seen or seen
Mhm.
through, overlooked. So if you are compelled to wear this mask in public, to be basically to make yourself irrecognizable, basically invisible because you are not visible. How does that, and when you see other people like that, you're also not really seeing them, right? They look, it's off somehow. It's very off-putting. It's almost scary, you know? And so I'm just thinking, you know, in this isolation, in the need for social distancing, if we can't even see one another from a distance, I get that we could still do this in the privacy of your home, and through the screen you can see other people, but not ever to be seen like in physical space in real time. That's really hard. So none of this is supposed to affect, if the government decides that it's necessary, I mean, I'm not going to, not comply. But I'm throwing this at you, Paul. These concerns, of if this is not absolutely necessary, I'm only doing it in the supermarket. I tried it a little bit in public, and then I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to go beyond the call here, above and beyond, unless they tell me I must.
Well, you can rob a bank and get away with it if you're wearing a mask.
Well,
So
that's
there
the
are
only
advantages.
that's the only that's the only advantage.
No,
I,
it obviously it's. I mean, you're right. I mean, the face, I mean, is the person, and so it's really unpleasant and unfortunate. Although, as you say, I mean, if we're mandated to by civil authorities, we're told by our church authorities that we must obey. So we have to do it, whether we like it or not. All I can say is hopefully it'll pass. And, it's obviously difficult to overcome things that we're used to. I mean, one of the reasons that the virus spread so much in Italy is there's such a physical people. They're always touching and hugging and talking loudly in each other's faces and so on, and that accelerated. And so they have had big adjustment to kind of implement social distancing in a country where this is just scandalous almost. And in a sense, your reaction is exactly the same. I mean, we are so accustomed to seeing one another's faces. We also have the reaction of those cultures in which especially women's faces are hidden, that causes an allergic reaction. And I could see where that would be a bigger issue in Europe than it would be in the United States, simply because you're more exposed to that Muslim culture because of the flow of refugees in the last few years.
I haven't had a bad experience with the Muslim, populations that have flooded Europe. I have some, at this point, I'm quite close with some of the Muslims, that I've had. Well, I've shared on my show that I've done some work for the refugees, but what I don't think, there are things that are not just cultural. They're basically human. It's not an Italian thing or a Russian thing to occasionally, also in our sacramental life, there are moments of touch, of contact, of physicality.
Yeah.
There are moments, I can't think of a single icon that would have a saint not with the face visible. Yes, the head is covered in the case of the women, but there's no covered face Am I forgetting somebody? I don't think I'm forgetting any saint, right? That is your, I guess, the image and likeness of God is being reflected somehow, you know, in the face. We're given to see the face of God in his only begotten Son. We celebrate and depict his face, you know. That's not forbidden. I mean, Muhammad himself is not depictable, you know. So there is a different, forget about women, there's a different approach somehow to physicality. It's a deep topic with the Muslims, you know. I'm certainly not trying to say that we should fight this. That's just not my style, you know. But I want to express a deep, like, disturbance by this.
Frankly, frankly, for me, I mean, it's more upsetting not to be able to go to church than it is having to wear a face mask. I mean, to me, it is secondary. It's temporary. It'll pass. It's necessary for, to prevent transmission of the disease. So I'm happy to live with that. I am less upset with that than the fact that I'm not supposed to go to church for X number of weeks or months. So, I mean, to me, it's a secondary issue.
No, but going to church is also human. That's also necessary not to spread disease.
Yeah.
Of course, it's upsetting, but everybody understands that if people are in close contact, hopefully the church is not completely empty all the time anyway. But if it's full, then it's a dangerous thing to do right now. So there's no use being upset about it when it's, like you said. But with the mask, it's also human to go out and be seen. So why is that less human than going to church? Why is it less painful on a personal level? It's you're becoming invisible. Like if you had to go to church in a face mask, I think that is a very strange, also sacramentally, because there is an aesthetic to the priest's celebration, right? The aesthetic side is important. How does that work?
We'll see when it happens. It hasn't happened yet, but it may. I would imagine a priest in the hospital has to wear a face mask when he visits a sick patient and gives communion.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's because but that's not a liturgical setting. I mean, we do have a difference between.
Well, it's a liturgical setting if he has to do an anointing of the sick and wear a face mask.
Well, what I meant to say that it's not the church space. We do have a difference, even though some people, it's fashionable to say that the whole world is like a church and it's all sacred, but it's not. There are special rules for the sacred space, right?
But again, you can't make I mean, these are extraordinary circumstances that call for extraordinary responses. So, I mean, in a sense, all the rules kind of go by the board in an emergency situation. And then when things get back to normal, then we get back to our lives, possibly wiser for it.
Yes. Well, this concerns me. Why? Because the Asian countries, like you see the Japanese people walking around in masks, for years, they're not saying that they actually will stop doing it. And our Bundeskanzler, Sebastian Kurz, the Chancellor of Austria, he said, we're going to see if it's a good idea to adopt this in public. For me, it's incredible to imagine that. Just that kind of, for public space to be devoid of human faces. I mean, I don't think it's the same if you live not say in a big European city. You very much inhabit the city. You know the people who own the businesses around here. You see their faces. You are seen. That's your community, on a certain level. And for us, also within church spaces, not to see each other's faces is just, dehumanizing.
But you just said, in Asia, I mean, I was in China in June, and even before any epidemic, a lot of people on the streets wore masks because of the pollution, perhaps because of social distancing that has become part of the culture. In Japan, it's the same thing. And, it may be something that we're going to have to get used to it, whether we like it or not. And certainly during time of epidemic, I think it may be mandated, so we will have no choice. I'm hoping it doesn't come to that. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, to walk by people and not see their faces is, kind of talk about social separation. I mean, that is separation to the extreme.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I think maybe it's a conspiracy of the ugly lobby. Who is going to be really happy is the ugly people. So I suspect them, and I'm on to them, Paul. That's what I want to finish this wonderful conversation with. Thank you so much, my friend. It's good to see you, and please give my regards to your wife. And I thank her that I could take you away for this time to chat with you. You stay well, stay safe. And from my desert to yours, have a blessed transition into Great Week. It's not that far away. It's earlier for Western Christians. Coming up is their Palm Sunday. So I'm saying to our viewers who are coming up to Palm Sunday, a happy upcoming Palm Sunday to you, wherever you are celebrating, whether it's with your family at home or if you live alone, then I wish you and the rest of us that are right behind you by 1 week to accompany the Lord at his entrance into Jerusalem. Whatever branches you can get, maybe in your yard, we will be greeting him as he enters seated on a donkey. Paul, any final words to our viewers?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Sister Vassa. I enjoyed talking with you, and I hope you have a good cup of Viennese coffee for me. We have coffee in Seattle too, but I think
yes, do you? Yes, the birthplace.
Viennese coffee is better. But I hope and pray that we all have a blessed Pascha, and that this epidemic will pass. And I think we will emerge from this having learned something. Not quite sure what yet, but I think there is a lesson in all this, and we need to have our hearts open and be open to whatever that lesson may be for all of us and for our churches. So, a blessed Pascha. Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed, Paul. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody. I will see you next week. Same time, same place.